are talking giant spider, or at least that's the English translation of this Chinese monster movie. This is a recent 2021 film, and we've seen loads of giant monster movies coming out from China, and we've reviewed a good few of them on the channel so far. I actually gotta say I enjoyed this one probably the best out of all of them so far, and we'll talk about why that is in just a minute. But let's talk about what the story's like. What's this kind of about, this movie? It actually takes elements from the movie Aliens, James Cameron's Aliens, along with a sprinkling of elements from Predator, and also the Marvel character Black Widow, believe it or not, and of course, giant spider films. So we have a lab which is located out in the middle of the desert somewhere, and they are doing some type of genetic experiments that involve spiders, including making some type of giant spider. Inevitably, this spider gets loose and ends up killing the inhabitants of the lab. And a short time later, we see a group of military types that are sequestered in to try and go and try and find if there's any type of survivors there. And they are accompanied by a kind of a scientist who is related to this kind of this lab, and his assistant, who is this sort of cyborg woman with a lightsaber. Yet it's a little bit out there. They also have a kind of a B mission, which is to try and take out this group of like insurgent types that are kind of camped out there as well. I'm not quite sure exactly what is going on plot-wise in this movie, I won't lie. But nonetheless, let's talk about what I think worked from this movie. As I've said, I actually do think this one is certainly more enjoyable, if a little more nonsensical than a lot of them. Why did I enjoy it so much? I think, to be honest, this one is more of a kind of a straight kind of action film. It very much takes the template from the movie Aliens, a group of Marines going into a complex with a kind of like, with insect-like kind of antagonists, kind of like the movie Aliens. What I liked about it is I do get a sense of scale with this one. We have a group of military types that kind of look like military types. They kind of look like legitimate kind of soldiers with proper equipment, vehicles, things like this. Then we kind of have these desert scenes where we have, you know, some fantastic photography and kind of, you know, great location shooting. There's a kind of a siege in this kind of like this desert kind of environment on the night with these spiders. And we also get a pretty good kind of shootout scene with kind of some human kind of insurgents and antagonists, I guess you'd call them, as well, which I think was quite done here. I think the soldiers kind of act kind of like soldiers, which I kind of quite liked. The movie's pretty fast paced. I kind of like some of the weird science fiction elements here. For example, our cyborg Black Widow-esque sort of style assassin. Don't know why she's there, to be honest with you. Don't know why she's got a robot arm. Don't know why she's got a lightsaber. But there you go. It's just kind of similar things to enjoy. There's also some elements here, story-wise, that I thought worked a little better than some of these other films. There's no sort of, you know, horned-in kind of romance angle, despite the fact that there's an attractive kind of female lead. Our corporate kind of scientist guy, you know, I was completely expecting him to be the typical kind of slimeball scientist kind of like company guy, and there's a degree of him kind of knowing a little bit more than maybe he's letting on, but he's not, you know, he's not portrayed to be the typical kind of like corporate evil guy that you'll see in a lot of these kind of movies as kind of well. And, you know, when we get into the kind of the lab, I think the set design is great. They're obviously using some type of real kind of you know, sort of tunnels and things like that to kind of make this kind of lab, you know, look kind of like it's some secret laboratory, and all these kind of like corridors and stuff. And the set design I think is very good. There's a couple of decent kind of action sequences and even a little bit of gore here and there. So that's all pretty good. So yeah, I actually kind of had some reasonable things to say here. However, let's not get ahead of ourselves. This is a Chinese monster movie that still has some of the same old problems that they all do. Number one, the CGI is still awful. Now, this being a spider-related movie, I'll be honest with you, I was kind of expecting maybe the CGI would be a little better here. as I would have assumed that kind of having CGI spiders is probably a little bit easier than having like fleshy type sharks or what have you, and things like that, where they're maybe a little bit easier to kind of make realistic. No, these still look like cartoon spiders, I've got to be honest with you. And, you know, the CGI is as bad as any of these kind of sort of Chinese movies. So unfortunately, yeah, the CGI hasn't improved. On top of that, I would say there's some unnecessarily odd choices here to have CGI when it would have been far more easy to have a simple practical effect. What do I mean? Let me give you a couple of examples. So we have this this kind of Black Widow-esque female agent who is kind of this kind of protector of this scientist guy, and she's got a robot arm. It would have been quite easy to have robot silver arm, a silver arm, you know, something like that. We've seen it on Bucky and the Winter Soldier, something like along lines of that. But no, they CGI an arm onto her, like a robot arm, which kind of looks like it's more or less the same dimensions of a regular arm. Just paint the arm silver. Why have a CGI arm? It looks crap. It surely would have been more expensive to do that. And then we have like just some odd choices. There seems to be practically no there seems to be no practical effects. We have a scene, for example, where this female cyborg is holding like a large spider leg, and again it's CGI. You know, how much trouble would it have been to make a kind of a CGI just left for this one kind of scene? But it's a CGI one, and again it looks super fake. So the CGI here is both poorly done and also unnecessarily put in the movie, where I think it just didn't need to be there, and it would have been far easier, and I would suggest cheaper, to make some practical effects, and it look a hell of a lot better on screen as well. So there's that. Okay, acting wise, I always struggle a little bit here with acting in regards to you know, non-English language movies, because obviously what I'm reading on screen is not necessarily the direct translation of what they're saying. And I've got to say, the acting here is mixed. I wouldn't say it was bad, and I would say certainly in the dramatic scenes, I've got to say I think they seem to fare quite a lot better. But it's actually the action sequences where I think maybe the acting didn't look quite as good. And what I mean here is that the actors are obviously shooting against things that aren't there, i.e. these CGI spiders. And they simply don't look like they're really reacting to things. I mean, we just go going, you know, you've got to imagine there's a giant spider coming towards you. You'd at least kind of maybe take a couple of steps back. No, you know, it's kind of like that. So I've got to say, I think some of the acting in regards to certainly the kind of the having to face off against these creatures isn't on the best side, right? So I think actually some of the dramatic acting is a little better here. There's some odd decisions in this movie, plot-wise. As I've said, we don't really know why there's a kind of a cyborg woman here. We don't really know why she's got a lightsaber, or, you know, no one seems to bat an eyelid about it. And there's just things here that just are very kind of, the plot is just skirting over. Like, I mean, it's probably about 3 minutes in for our first spider attack. So there's literally no time to kind of like establish what's kind of going on in regards to the lab and things like this, and sort of characters. It's straight in there, which is good, I guess, for pacing reasons, but it really doesn't kind of give you any type of real sense about what is kind of going on. And then in kind of movie, again, there's just some odd decisions that seem to be a little on the sillier side. You know, that we have one action sequence. This is kind of where it reminds me a little bit of Predator. Before we kind of get into the kind of the creatures, we have an action sequence against human opponents, and it seems to be this group of people that are just out in the desert. I don't really know why they're there, or why our guys are fighting them. Again, it's not really well established in the movie who they are and why it is that we are kind of group of protagonists are fighting them. But they're all there with like paintball masks on in the middle of the desert. I'm thinking, why? Why are you wearing paint? You know, this is some sort of type of secret base. Why are all your soldiers walking around with paintball masks on? Doesn't make sense, doesn't it? You know, I guess if you were robbing a bank, you would hide your identity wearing a kind of a mask. But it doesn't make sense to them be walking around in their own base with nothing else for miles around, with a bunch of paintball masks on. So it's kind of like silly, I've got to be honest. So ultimately, this movie is flawed, but it is fun, and this is more fun than a lot of the other Chinese monster movies, I think, because it's the military stuff is a little better handled, I think. It doesn't kind of go into some of the typical kind of like story elements that I think that are easy melodrama. It has less padding than some of the films, but like I've said, I do think that the actual plot itself seems fairly nonsensical, and the damn CGI is as bad as ever. I'll give it a 5 out of 10. That might sound like I'm giving it a low mark, considering I say I enjoyed it, and I did enjoy this movie to a point. But you know, a 5 for me is kind of an average score. It's not bad, but I can't really say this isn't a better than average movie, because it simply isn't. But it's an entertaining one. So I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. But I would say, for an enjoyment factor, this to me is the most enjoyable Chinese monster movies that I've reviewed within the last 12 months or so, of which is probably about the 8th or 9th movie I've done of these kind of type ones. So would you see it? Have you seen it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.